to our two panellists, and then then open the floor for a broader conversation, both maybe about the survey or else about the recommendations itself. But Andrew.
Yes, good. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Lawson. This is Andrew Byrne at my side, just to distinguish. Firstly, I think tremendous congratulations are due to Warren and the International Budget Project for the work that's been done. To establish an internationally acknowledged and utilised index, to repeat it 3 times, and to have a coverage of 94 countries with a robust methodology behind it is an enormous achievement, and something which I think bodes well for the future of transparency and debate around budgets and what can be done. So, I mean, I think they've had their rounds of applause on different occasions, but they certainly deserve those. Moving forward, I think Warren presented some recommendations and presented some ideas about how this might go a further step. And clearly it should go further. One of the things that strikes me is that it's pretty clear that having transparency about budgets is a necessary condition for good decision-making, but by no means sufficient. So it is important that this goes ahead alongside some of the other measures and ideas that Warren mentioned. The UK, unfortunately, is one of the best examples where transparency is really not sufficient to get good public spending decisions. The UK scores very high on this ranking in terms of its transparency. And indeed, I've been impressed over the last 6 months the amount of information that's in the public domain about spending decisions and spending cuts and where they should happen and where they're not. But nevertheless, we've come to a process where a comprehensive spending review has just accepted that we should have aircraft carriers that won't have aircraft on them. And we've had decisions taken about the structure of spending in schools, which the National Audit Office would certainly have a lot of things to ask about. But the National Audit Office won't ask those questions for another year or so, and the decisions have now been taken. So I think there is always a need to remember the need for analysis, for lively debate, for transparency to be used. So this is an index that helps that to happen, but the agencies involved in making more use of it do need to be more active as well, including in our own countries. The second point of caveat is partly about how to convert the index into something bigger and something more influential. I'm sure you're all familiar with Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, which most people would say is quite a useful idea, gives a useful idea of levels of corruption in different countries. But at the same time, it's an index which has had a lot of methodological problems. It is a perceptions index, and usually the numbers of people interviewed in order to get these perceptions are too small to permit any significant judgments on levels of corruption. So Transparency International are sort of fighting to re-establish a stronger methodological base for the index, and in the process I think it's taken a couple of steps back. It's not as influential as it used to be. So clearly in moving forward, the key thing for the Open Budget Index is to remain rigorous, and I admire the procedures. I've been a peer reviewer for 2 different countries, so I know something about what that means, and I think the procedures work well. It's fundamentally important to keep that robust. Because if there is a little bit of a step back, it becomes more difficult to push forward with the advocacy side. The other side of moving forward is about coverage, and the 8 budget reports which are the focus of the index are all fundamentally important and provide between them pretty good information on what's happening to budgets and spending. But I occasionally wonder if citizens don't want to know a little bit more. For example, the transparency of decisions on public tenders. You know, is that something that could begin to be part of an index in the future? There are certain aspects of revenue legislation which are not always well presented in pre-budget statements or in budgets themselves. And this is especially true in countries which derive large proportions of their revenue from oil or gas or from the extractive industries. So maybe there's room for a bit more attention to revenue, a bit more attention to public tenders, and that would make it more meaningful for citizens in certain countries. The final question I wanted to raise is whether the combination of a good index, well announced, well presented, well discussed, plus advocacy and public pressure, is in fact enough to get the worst performance to change what they're doing. I would rather suspect not. And I would suspect that within the group of 74 who are not performing quite so well, there's probably a middle group who are keen to do more, keen to learn, and obviously those need to be partners in moving forward. But there's probably a pretty recalcitrant core of 20 somewhere near the bottom who are not worrying terribly much about the levels of transparency. So I'm not sure what the way to tackle that is. A thought that occurs to me, and I'm sure there's people in the audience that would have ideas as well. One thought that occurs to me is that there perhaps closer links with the extractive industries transparency initiative might be a way forward. Or closer links with Revenue Watch or with other agencies looking very directly at, in particular, what oil-rich countries are doing with their resources. So I think that's more a question mark for discussion. But overall, full marks to the team. Congratulations again.